Hey everybody, today I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on these 4 card games. So we have Bali, we have Abluxxen, also known as Linko, Gift of Tulips, and Photograph, also known as Wind the Film. But before I get into my reviews of these 4 games, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer when it comes to purchasing board games here in the UK. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so I'm going to start with my least favourite of the bunch, but I don't want that to sound overly negative because I actually think all 4 of these games are of a good quality. But Bali is a 2 to 4 player game, takes around 45 minutes to play, maybe a bit quicker than that with those lower player counts. But this is a hand management and commodity speculation style game with a degree of engine building as you are playing out these cards in front of you and building up a little tableau, and they are going to improve your ability to do things such as collecting resources, collecting these different commodities which are going to be your points at the end of the game based on how popular those particular types were sacrificed on this kind of central table here. So I like the way that you're collecting things, but even having to spend those things to boost the value of those things already in your hands. You have a little bit of give and take there. But I really like a mechanism in this game is that when you play these cards in front of you and you replenish your hand back up to 3 cards, you do it by taking it from these 4 columns of cards that are displayed before all the players. Now the card you take is going to replenish your hand, of course, but the card that you've just kind of left open or you just revealed is going to trigger the matching cards in each player's tableau. So for example, if you collected a bunch of these points cards, then all those points cards in front of all the players are going to be triggered. And if you have the majority, you will get an additional point. There's other ones as well which relate to the different resources you're collecting. Again, if you trigger those, you will end up collecting resources, and if you have the most, you'll get an additional resource. But they'll also allow you to get discounts on purchasing these commodities in a different phase in the game. So the more cards you play means that you're probably going to get that bonus resource, but it also means you can buy them for a cheaper price. And it's all about trying to, again, speculate what is going to be the most popular one there. You can play these shrine cards, which will force everybody to play a card on the shrine, which again will change or fluctuate the values in secret of those different commodities. But one of those commodities is played face up, just to give you a little hint as to what the other players could go for. But of course, you could be using that as a diversion tactic, trying to make your opponents invest in a certain commodity, when in actuality, you know that there's not that many in the deck at all, at least according to your own knowledge. It actually works really well. Again, I do like that mechanism of revealing what's left. And there's nothing wrong with it at all, to be honest. It plays pretty quickly. That deck of cards does deplete pretty rapidly. But I have to say, despite me liking a lot about it, I do feel like it lacked a certain spark. I had played this originally at 2 players, which I thought was decent. I was really excited to try it at 3 players because I thought that commodity speculation part of the game would be a bit more dynamic as everybody would be going for different things, where in actuality it kind of felt the same. And I think it's one of those games where if you find yourself building up a bit of an engine and collecting a certain type of commodity, then you've got a kind of a straightforward strategy as to try and pad out those sacrifice cards to match your deck as much as possible. And it's pretty predictable about what you want to do and what you are going to do. So yeah, in that regard, I think it's not terribly interesting in terms of the decisions and the strategies, despite there being some cool ideas here. So I do like it. I also think there's a few teething issues at times, depending on how the deck is shuffled. Like, for example, I played a game of this where, there was none of the stone resources. None of them came out until like the bottom half of the deck, meaning that we're pretty much paralyzed on what we could do because we couldn't harness those resources. But hey, I don't want it to sound negative because this is a solid game and it actually was better than I thought it was going to be. Because I picked this one up as a bit of a punch, really. I wasn't sure what to expect. It's a quality card game, but ultimately it's not going to stand out from amongst the pack. And I rated it probably about a 6 out of 10. So good, but not great. And I'd consider it a bit of a near miss, really. Next up, we have Gift of Tulips. This is a 2 to 6 player game that takes around 20 minutes to play on average. And this game actually has some similarities to Bali, like we've just discussed, because this is another commodity speculation game. In this one, you have 4 suits of these tulip cards. each in a different colour. And kind of during setup, you will put a number of these tulip cards on display, and the more numerous of those cards are going to be worth more points at the end of the game if you have the majority of them in your hand. So there'll be like a first, second, or even a third place if you play with enough players. And the actions you can take in this game are pretty interesting, because I think there's 3 or 4 options, but you cannot take the same one twice. So you can either play a card in that central display to manipulate that kind of popularity order. So if you have a ton of cards in your hand that you want them to be the most popular, you can boost the value of those cards. You can even play them face down on this kind of this pile, where at the end of the game they'll be shuffled together and then they'll be added to that kind of central area to maybe throw a spanner in the works, or maybe divert players to take cards that you didn't want them to think they were popular, that kind of thing. But the cool thing about this game is that the other 2 options are that you can either keep cards for yourself or you can give them away. Now, if you keep the most popular cards to yourself, obviously with the aim of trying to score them by having those majorities, then you get no instant points. But if you keep the least popular cards to yourself, then you get quite a healthy amount of points for doing that. And in reverse to that, if you give away the most popular cards, then you get a good amount of points. But if you give away the least popular cards, then you don't get any points. So it has quite a cool little conundrum there, where if you are quite confident in having the majority of a certain suit, then you might be confident enough to give that card away with the aim of getting, or the immediate aim of getting, a nice chunk of points there. It actually flows really nicely. The decision space is relatively light here, but for a 20-minute game, that does tailor up to 6 players, it is quite a nice one, and I was left pleasantly surprised by it. And the reason I rank this one higher than Bali, even though I probably rate the gameplay pretty much identically, again, this one is more flexible and it is a lot faster. So this one is not really one to sleep on if you want something that's very breezy to play, very pleasant to look at, and probably one that's flown under the radar. Then give Gift of Tulips a look, because it is a nice one. Next up, I have Abluxxen, also known as Linko in the United States, I believe. This is a 2 to 5 player game, and the box says this game takes 20 minutes to play. Now, that is true in some cases, but a lot of the time this game takes a lot faster than that, because I've had 5-minute games of this, I've had 10-minute games, 15-minute games, and definitely haven't gone beyond that 20 minutes. So I think worst case scenario, or longest case scenario, it is going to take 20 minutes. Now, this is a card shedding game by the great design duo Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling. So this one, you are essentially playing cards out. You're going to start with 13 cards. You're going to play them out in front of you, and with the aim of playing them, because playing them is going to get you points. Any card remaining in your hand when the game ends is going to give you negative points. But when you play them, you can play as many cards of one identical number as you like. So you can play a single card, or you can play, say, 5 8s or 3 7s, 2 9s. As long as they're all the same number, that's absolutely fine. Now, if another player has played the identical number of cards, as in the quantity, but you've played a higher number on those cards, then you have the option to do what's called snatch their cards. And when you do that, you can either take the cards that they've played last and put them back into your hand, which is obviously not good immediately, because it means you're going to have more negative points. But it does mean that you've taken cards off them, meaning that they're not going to score those cards. But of course, you are going to be maybe boosting more identical cards in your hand, so you can maybe play stronger plays later. But something you can do as well is that if you do a snatch maneuver, is you can choose not to take them, which will force your opponent to make a decision whether to discard those cards and draw back up from this central drafting row, or they can put them straight back into their hand, maybe with the aim of playing them again later. And again, you're just going to keep doing that until you shed all of your cards. Then the player who shedded first is going to trigger the end, and then you're going to calculate how many cards you've got played, and minus any card you have remaining in your hand. Now, that is the entire game I've explained there. This is definitely one of those games where you need to see it played or play it yourself to for things to really fit into place, because the rules themselves are really simple, but I think it's one of those games you need to just get out your system to understand how it works. And I'll tell you what, this game is an absolute blast. I wasn't quite sure what to think of it the first time I played it, but as things started to fit together and I started to understand what I was doing, why I would maybe want to take more cards, that satisfaction of playing, say, 5, 6 cards of the same number at once, knowing that your opponents can't snatch them off you, or if they do, that's going to be a massive move. And it's really cool. And sometimes you can even lay little tricks So a little traps down in front of you by laying a low number there. Maybe your opponent will snatch it, you'll discard it, and then you will take another card from that central row with the aim of trying to boost something else in your hand. Got a really nice flow to it, a nice back and forth, a nice tempo, and it's just a nice breezy game without being silly. It's got some good decisions to be made here as well. Now, this game is one that I never really hear anybody talking about it, despite Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling being so popular. And I certainly think that if you are into games such as Scout or Mask Men, Scout was a game that blew up massively this last couple of years. I'm almost confident, or in fact I'm certain, that you will enjoy this one. So if you like those clever little games that aren't too brain burnery but have enough going on, then this is certainly one to look at. Now, I think unfortunately it is quite difficult to get hold of in Europe, or at least in the UK it is, but maybe in your country it's not. And if you do like those quick but clever card games, then Abluxxen is a great one to add to your collection. So this one is definitely going to get a commendation from me. I think it's a lot of fun, and it's going to hit the table a lot from this day onwards. And the final game I'm talking about today is Photograph, which used to be known as Wind the Film. This is designed by Sashi. It accommodates 2 to 4 players and takes around 30 minutes to play on average. So I really was in two minds whether to put this one last or whether to put Abluxxen last, because I love them both and they are so different and good in different ways. Now, I think objectively Photograph is the better and more clever game of the two, but this is like the quintessential example of a game where I need to be in the right mood and the right headspace in order to play it, because it is very punishing and pretty unforgiving as you are trying to build out these runs of cards in these different in the different colours. The longer the runs, the better, and you even have a little bit of grace in what you can play in these runs of cards. So, like for example, if you played the 3, you could maybe play, I think it's the 4, 5, or the 6. But if you go beyond that, like if you jump straight from a 3 to a 7, then you score some negative points. But the twist in this game is that you are drafting cards from this grid of cards here. Some of those cards are face up, so you know exactly what they are, and some of them are face down, so you know the suit of cards, but you don't know the exact number. Now, beyond that, when you take cards, you put them into your hand in a very specific order, and you can never ever rearrange the cards in your hand. And every turn, you have one opportunity to rearrange one card by bringing it from your hand, kind of from the back of your hand, which is going to be the first card that you play, back to the front of your hand, meaning that it's going to be the last card that you play. And another twist is that when you take cards, you can take one, I believe it's 1, 2, or 3 cards. You are forced to play that many cards that round. So if you take 3 cards, you have to play 3 cards. If you take 1 card, you have to play 1 card. Now, playing 1 card is a lot safer, it's a lot more easier to manage, but you are kind of handicapping yourself by not being able to play too many, and you're obviously playing a lot fewer cards than your opponents are if they are taking those bigger risks by playing 2 or 3 cards per turn. So it really is this balancing act of how risky am I going to be? Can I suss out this puzzle and be as efficient as I can? Am I going to leave myself some wiggle room to play more cards later? There's even a race to get a certain amount of cards played before your opponents do. And again, weighing up all those factors becomes a very agonizing puzzle. And this falls into a very small kind of category of games for me where I love them. I love the design of them. And there's another game like this called Arboretum in my collection, which is a very unassuming game, much like Photograph is, where it's just a bunch of cards, very nice looking cards, but the decisions just make you feel so uncomfortable from the get-go, because again, you do not have that, you do not have that breezy feel. You cannot make mistakes. If you do, you're going to get punished and just downright lose the game. So you really do have to be switched on and engaged from start to finish with this one, because the smallest mistake is going to cost you heavily. But it's a brilliant game. I'm so glad I have it in my collection, because I was looking for this for a long time, because it was only available, I believe, kind of in Japan or something. Now it is more widely available. It's just great. But yeah, if you want those next level card games, probably advanced strategy card games, without being rules heavy, then Photograph is a really good one to look at. This is kind of a niche game. I think it's not going to be for everybody, because it's not one of those games you can just sit down and play with your friends. You're going to have to really, again, probably go a bit quiet and suss out that puzzle yourself. But the payoff is definitely worth it for me, and I do recommend it a lot. So that is Photograph, another commendation from the chairman. So that concludes the video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. Some great games here, particularly Abluxxen and Photograph, but still they're all good in their own rights. Now, if you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.